So I also wanted to, before just launching in, sort of do an acknowledgement of where I'm located, because I think it's important to ground myself in that. So yeah, I just want to acknowledge that where I am from, so I'm located in Montreal in Canada, also known as Turtle Island, and that where I'm located, yeah, I'm on unceded Indigenous lands of the Kanien'kehá:ka Nation, that are, recognized as the custodians of the lands and waters on which I am presenting today. And Tiohtià:ke, which is also known as Montreal, is historically known as the gathering place for many First Nations, and it's home today to many Indigenous populations. And other peoples who are not Indigenous. And this is just to recognize that we have connections to the past, the present, and the future. And it's in the idea that we are constantly decolonizing our minds and understanding our ongoing relationships as someone who is a settler here with the Indigenous populations. So with that said, I will start with, okay. Wonderful. So, so we're doing the live session this week for week 2, and I just wanted to ground us in a little bit of an agenda, just so we know where we're going with this session. So I'm going to do a quick introduction of myself, and just because I think that the personal is political, so I want to let you a little bit more on who I am. And then we're going to talk about disability justice, and I titled it Dreaming Disability Justice, as some of you may have seen. That was one of the titles of the required readings for this week by Leela Lakshmi. And then we're going to get intersectional.
Can I just interrupt for a second? If you could
yes.
enlarge your screen, if you could just make it, as a slide show, so so that, it will be a little...
Yes.
Thanks so much.
Apologies for that. How do I do that?
Go to view and make it full screen. Go to view and then go to full screen right at the bottom.
Thank you so much. Appreciate that.
No problem.
Okay, wonderful. I hope that is better, and apologies for that. Okay, and then the next part is so activities. I have a few activities for us. We actually are going to do some interactive things prior, but I have 2 specific activities that we're going to do, hopefully maybe in smaller groups. If that doesn't work, we'll stay together. It's all good. Then we're going to do a piece on sexuality, disability, and ableds are weird, which I'll explain more, but that was also in your PowerPoint presentation for this week. And then we can get to questions. Hope that sounds fine for everyone. All right, so introductions. A little bit about me. Hi, I'm Nelly. So I've shared quite a few, you'll see in the next few slides, just cartoons, because I think they're fun, and I love memes. Just to share a little bit more about myself. So I'm sorry if I'm moving my screen. It's because I don't know what I'm doing. Okay, cool. So one of the cartoons that you have here is that of a person who is a woman wearing glasses, and her hair is tied up in a bun, and wearing black jogging pants and a horizontally striped red and white tank top, standing on an orange yoga mat in warrior pose, with many thought bubbles around her that say, am I doing this right? Am I doing anything right? What is my life's purpose? Is everyone looking at me? Am I happy? What do I want? do my boobs look weird in this top? Should I get chips for dinner? And under that illustration, we have, it says warrior pose, as in I worry a lot. And hi, that's me. I'm anxious. I worry a lot. So yeah, I just wanted to share that, because one of the things that I do live with is anxiety and depression, fun combination. And yeah, that's one of the things that I wanted to share, because I feel that in terms of disability, yeah, on a mental health level, I often struggled with, you know, am I disabled enough? Does this matter? And so, you know, I've through activism and through being surrounded by wonderful disability rights and justice activists, you know, I've started to find my place. So another one, this is all still linked to mental health, so much fun.
Nelly, I'm so sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to ask you if you wouldn't mind, there was a request to make the presentation in full screen, like full presentation mode, so it's a little bit larger.
Oh, okay, I'm so sorry about that.
No, it's totally fine. Thank you.
I'm not sure how to do that.
Go back, Nelly, go to view, do a slideshow. Go to view, and then.
Oh, okay. I guess, sorry about that. I just don't think I can go back because I put it in full screen. And,
Can you go to the view button on top of your screen? Just the, you know, where the Chrome says view?
Yeah, I can't see that anymore. It's very strange.
No, if you just put your cursor closer to that, sometimes it gets hidden. Go a little up, closer to the top part, and it might just come down.
Or maybe try and double click on the slide. If you just try and double click on this slide, on the slide which is on.
On the slide itself? Oh, no.
No, on top, yeah.
My apologies.
No, why don't we adjust? Sushma, you want to talk people through the view options?
See, in the options, if if you can see your viewing Nelly Basili's screen in green, next to that, there is a view option button. You could enlarge, it there, and then you'd probably, there are different sizes. 50%, 100%, 150. So maybe the participants can just enlarge it themselves from there.
I could also try to maybe stop my screen and reshare it if that doesn't work. I apologize.
Don't worry about it, Nelly.
It's totally fine.
Yeah. Okay. Don't worry.
Hi, this is Daniel. I think I made the suggestion to use full screen mode, but don't worry about this. We can continue as it is. So don't worry.
Thanks, Danielle. Yes, Nelly, keep going.
Okay, wonderful. So I will resume then. Yeah, so the other two images that I have on here, one of the first ones is a spiral notepad with the words, not to-do list, overthink everything, with a pen next to the notepad, and the notepad and pen are on a coral background, coral color background. And then the other one is a picture with a frame, and there are words inside of the frame that say, my mind is like an internet browser. 19 tabs are open, 3 of them are frozen, and I have no idea where the music is coming from. So, oops. That's just to kind of bring you into my mind sometimes, that's how I feel. And then the other fun part is I live with something called the polycystic ovarian syndrome, and it's exhausting. It affects my menstrual cycle, regularity, fertility, weight, and it really makes me sometimes feel alienated from my body because the cysts on my ovaries cause terrible period cramps and blood clots in my case. I also have anemia. So much fun. But I live with all these things, and everybody and every person's experiences with PCOS and other things, mental health, are way different, and everyone's lived experience is important. So I just wanted to describe a little bit the cartoon illustration. There are 6 women who are of various backgrounds, and one of them asks, "Can I explain PCOS to others?" And the other one says, "PCOS, pretty, curvy, obviously sexy," which I think is going to be my new way of describing this. Then she says, "Go with me. This is going to catch on." And the person to the extreme right, my right hand side anyway, has like question marks on top of their head to kind of say like, what? And I wanted to bring all of that to ground me in that these are not just they're things that I live and experience on the daily. They are part of my disability experience, but they are only a small part of my lived reality, right? So I'm a multitude of things. And on top of that, I am also a baby of the diaspora. My parents have migrated from Egypt, and I am born in this land called Chochiage. And that also informs my experience. I am a person who, because of the diasporic situating, I also experience maybe some discriminations that I wouldn't have experienced in my parents' homeland. But I also know that I have privileges. I am a light-skinned person, and I don't experience the discrimination of folks who have, that are Black or have darker complexion. That could be like, I'm not going to be stopped by the police. And so that also informs my experience in terms of the privileges that I have. I am also a person who identifies as queer, and I'm bisexual, and that also informs my experience. And that also informs sometimes my questioning around, like, am I queer enough? Just like I was saying earlier, am I disabled enough? So all of these things inform my experience and make me a multitude. So the other thing that I wanted to do in terms of introduction is where I work. So I work at the Disabled Women's Network of Canada. And I'm going to read from the slide. Established in 1985, the Disabled Women's Network of Canada is a national feminist cross-disability organization that has provided opportunities for self-determination and leadership development for women with disabilities. It says for 30 years, but actually it should say 35, because we're in our 35th year. Our mission is to end the poverty, isolation, discrimination, and violence experienced by Canadian women with disabilities and deaf women. So Dawn Canada works towards the advancement and inclusion of women and girls with disabilities and deaf women by creating change at a systemic level. This includes building strategies, strategic partnerships, developing curriculum and educational tools, and addressing a policy change. And staying true to our grassroots, we keep women with disabilities at the center of our work, and we amplify their voices by ensuring that they're represented at decision-making tables. So that's just for an introduction of where I work, and I can certainly answer more questions if that is something you want to know about. So let's do a little check-in. How's week 2 of DCROI so far? So I am going to ask y'all, although I'm not sure if I'm going to see the chat, but basically, I wanted to know if on a spectrum, so I have a spectrum here, and on one end of the spectrum, it says that you're on team overwhelmed here. And on the other end of the spectrum, it says, I'm a disability justice champ. And I guess I wanted folks to tell me where they sort of lie on that spectrum. So there is a little, I can move these little illustrations. So there's one of a thunderstorm for the team overwhelmed over here, and then there is a little cloud that's kind of in the middle, and then there's a heart for a disability justice champ. And I guess either you can unmute and say where you are at, and I'll place these little illustrations where they should be on the spectrum of where you feel, or I don't know how I would see the chat. Can I see the chat? I'm not sure.
Nellie, I can read out what I see on the chat if you want.
Oh, actually, I just popped it up.
Okay.
I don't know if that makes everyone see it, but oh, I see there's Team PCOS, yeah. Okay, all right, Elsa Cloud, all right, so let's move a cloud in here. Anyone else who wants to let me know how you're feeling? All right, there's lots of clouds, cool, cool, cool. I love that people are balanced. Okay, okay, I'm gonna put like a little thunder in the middle there. Clouds, clouds, more clouds. Okay, and then, oh, there's a heart kind of halfway in the middle, sort of there. A cute cloud. All right, cool, cool, cool. Let's do this. Cloud and thunder, I love it. Let's put two together. Thunder and cloud here, kind of in the middle, I think-ish. Team overwhelmed, yeah, I feel that. That's good, that's been my week. Oh wow, cloud, thunder, and heart, love it. All right, you can be all of the things. We just talked about multitudes, so that's awesome. Somewhere in the middle between thunder and cloud, yeah. Okay, I'm running out of clouds, but okay, a heart, I love it. Oh, okay, let me just do this. Apologies if y'all are seeing this, me moving it. All right, so between the cloud and the heart, I love it. There's more hearts, amazing. All right, so I'm seeing that there's kind of a, we've got a few disability justice champs ready to roar with the hearts, and then there are, quite a few clouds, somewhere in between cloud and thunderstorm, and that's okay. I just wanted to do a check-in to see where folks are at. So it seems like a lot of us are kind of in the middle, and right between thunder and cloud, closer to cloud. Amazing. So I'm gonna close the chat for now. This was just to sort of ground us in where we're at and where we're feeling. And I certainly hope that the overwhelmed part isn't because I've overwhelmed you with the readings and the materials, but we're going to go through some concepts, and we're going to do more activities. So this was just to do a little check-in, and thank you for participating in this. Okay, ooh. All right, dreaming disability justice. So I wanted to just go over disability justice one more time so that we are all connected to and have a collective understanding or better understanding. So disability justice challenges the idea that our worth as individuals has to do with our ability to perform as productive members of society. It insists that our worth is inherent and tied to the liberation of all beings. Like transformative justice, reproductive justice, and environmental justice, it implies a movement building strategy and an anti-capitalist critique. So when we have our readings from Leah Lakshmi, Dreaming Disability Justice, and Care Work, Dreaming Disability Justice, we learn about how movement building happens through what we also call cross-disability organizing, right? So that we know that the power of our movements comes from coming together, from organizing with the multitudes that we are, right? And that also implies the anti-capitalist critique. It also implies a bunch of other things like, the concept of intersectionality, which we'll come back to a little bit later on in the slides, but I just wanted to ground us in that small definition that I think rounds it up pretty well. But of course, in your readings, you can go deeper into disability justice. Okay, next slide. Ready for some more interaction? Cool. So who wrote the quote? I'm testing y'all to see if you did your readings. No, I'm just kidding. I have 4 quotes here, and the exercise will be that we want to figure out who wrote the quote, right? So I'm going to start with reading the first quote, and then in the chat box, you can tell me which one you think that first quote was, who you think the person is that are described, who the person is that wrote the quote. And I'm gonna, so I have Leah Lakshmi, Sins Invalid, Mia Mingus, Alison Kafer. I'm not really sure how to pronounce that. Those are the 4 folks that could be the writers of the quote. So I'll read the first quote. So it says, "The history of white supremacy and ableism are inextricably intertwined, created in the context of colonial conquest and capitalist domination. One cannot look at the history of US slavery, the stealing of indigenous lands, and US imperialism without seeing the way that white supremacy uses ableism to create a lesser or other group of people that is deemed less worthy, abled, smart, capable. A single issue civil rights framework is not enough to explain the full extent of ableism and how it operates in society." So the exercise is, who wrote the quote? Is it Leah Lakshmi, Sins Invalid, Mia Mingus, Alison Kafer? And y'all can let me know in the chat which one you think wrote this. Right, not all at once. So yeah, right, someone wrote Sins Invalid. What else do people think? Okay, Lakshmi. Yeah. Cool. Right, I'm gonna let a few more folks try to guess who wrote it. That's okay. All right, cool. I love that I have no idea. That's totally cool. All right, I love it. Okay, just a few more. I see a lot of Mia Mingus. All right. So if there are no more guesses coming along, Mia Mingus, okay. So I can give y'all the answers. It is Sins Invalid. Ding, ding, ding. Oh, wait, I'm trying to move this. So yeah, that one was Sins Invalid. But thank you for for participating in the first one. Okay, let's go to the second one. It's okay, no worries, Joe. Okay, so I'm gonna close the chat again. The second one says, "In the past decade, disability justice culture has bloomed through the hard work of disabled people who are also queer feminists of color, and it's not like that, anymore, at least not all of the time. It's not that ableists disregard for crip lives, both in the mainstream and outside our movements and communities, doesn't still exist. But I no longer worry that every single person I encounter at an event will be awkward or pity me or just not get it. I do not feel like I'm the only person I know who is talking about disability justice." So who wrote the quote? I'm going to go back to the chat. Okay, cool. Probably read that quote in Leah Lakshmi, Allison, Leah. Cool. Yeah, Mia Mingus has written about disability justice, absolutely. Allison, Cool. All right, I'm gonna take maybe a few more guesses and then we'll do the grand reveal. Oh. Cool, so the answer is Neil Lakshmi. Someone put it here. Oh. And yeah, right here. Thank you for your guesses, everyone. All right, let's go to the third quote. I'm going to close the chat again. So the third quote is, disability is framed as lacking, sad, and undesirable. A shortcoming at best, a tragedy at worst. Disabled people are used as the poster children of environmental injustice or the argument for abortion rights. For many people, even just the idea that we can understand disability as not wrong is a huge shift in thinking. Who wrote the quote? All right. Sounds like Mia. Yeah, cool. Cool. All right, y'all are really good. It is Mia Mingus. So, and let me try to move this one. So, well, de facto, and I'm still gonna read it, the last one, you will have guessed who it is, it's Allison. So the last quote is, "Crip time is flex time, not just expanded, but exploded. It requires reimagining our notions of what can and should happen in time, or recognizing how expectations of how long things take are based on very particular minds and bodies. Rather than bend disabled bodies and minds to meet the clock, Crip time bends the clock to meet disabled bodies and minds." So that's Allison, as you will have guessed. And I cheated because Allison is not one of the readings that I put in, but all the three others, Sins Invalid, Leela Lakshmi, and Mia Mingus, are all readings that you've had. But yeah, Allison wrote about queer crip feminist thinking, and so I'll bring in more examples as we go through the week of Allison's work. So thank you everyone for participating in this. This was just to kind of do a fun little activity and ground us in some of the folks who have really built what disability justice looks like and means, and have been at the forefront of the movement for disability justice. So the other slide I'm going to go through is this image, and I'll describe the image. So this is a drawing of a Black woman in a wheelchair wearing the orange uniform of the incarcerated. And she reaches out and clasps the hand of a woman in white, sitting against a wall, wearing a hijab, whose arm and leg and short of a hand or foot, and are wrapped in bandages. Through an empty window frame, a plane and explosions are visible in the background. And the text reads, disability justice means resisting together from solitary cells to open air prisons. To exist is to resist, and that's an image by Mika Bazant and Sins Invalid. So yeah, in the readings from Sins Invalid, you will have seen that they use art as a way to work through expression as disabled folks who really ground themselves in disability justice. And I wanted to explain a little bit more about this image and why I'm bringing it in. So this is Sins Invalid doing, the image came along with a statement that they put out that they called Disability Justice for Palestine. And this was, the statement was released in August, on August 6, 2014, during a 50-day military bombardment of Gaza, I'm Arabic speaking, so I have a hard time not saying the words in Arabic. So yeah, of Gaza by the Israeli Defense Force, which killed over 2,200 civilians and wounded approximately 11,000 and destroyed over 20,000 homes. And during that time, Sins Invalid was scheduled to premiere one of their documentaries at the Vancouver Queer Film Festival, which included an invitation by a prominent speaker, but then they realized and learned that the festival had accepted advertising from an organization known for pinkwashing, and pinkwashing is to sort of promote the gay friendliness of the Israeli government. In order to downplay the occupation and the killings of Palestinian people. And so they withdrew from, after much debate, they withdrew from the festival because as disability justice activists and thinkers and artists, disability justice also means to be in solidarity with various movements and to movement build. And so solidarity with Palestine and the struggle of the Palestinian people was also disability justice. So I wanted to bring that in as we ground ourselves in movement building through disability justice, right? And if there's, I'm gonna slow down here just for a moment. If there is anything in the chat, I'm not seeing it. But if the Kriya team can maybe let me know, or I can look back in the chat. Okay, I'm gonna keep going then. So, and then I wanted to take us into disability rights versus disability justice, right? So in our week 2, we're talking about disability justice, but we also compare it to disability rights. And I wanted to just bring us back to kind of a comparison between the two, because disability rights sort of is a precursor to disability justice in a lot of ways. And in disability rights, you know, it's very much working from a human rights framework. And it seeks very much to challenge legal frameworks and use litigation. So working within systems that already exist in order to put forward the rights of people with disabilities. And it's often organized by disability group, you know, so very much siloed into various disability rights groups and advocating for the rights of, for example, folks with physical disabilities on one hand, and then advocating in another group for folks with mental health disabilities, and then on the other hand, in a silo also advocating for you know, folks who are blind, and those folks don't normally talk very much with each other or organize together, right? Under a disability rights lens. And then there's also advocacy that stays largely within very normative framework. And what I mean by normative framework is that, you know, it is very much centered around oh. Did somebody want to say something?
No, that was just the screen reader, I think.
Yeah.
Oh, sounds good. So yeah, and yeah, the normative framework being not questioning, you know, that a lot of the disability organizing I would say in a North American context, because I'm going to ground myself in that, in where I'm situated, is very white, is very male-centered, is very focused on physical disabilities often, and doesn't go outside of that in terms of the organizing of who gets to have a voice, who gets to speak up, who gets to be at decision-making tables, right? And then there's disability justice. So disability justice, as you've probably seen in the readings, is organized and started as a thinking by queer folks of color with disability, right? So Black and brown queer folks who were like, we don't see ourselves represented in disability rights. It doesn't speak to our multitudes, right? Talked about multitudes earlier as being, you know, yes, I have a disability, and sometimes that disability is not visible. And I'm also, you know, a queer person, or I'm also a Black person, and so, or a person of color, or an Indigenous person, and those things are not inseparable from each other, right? And so the folks that came together to term what is disability justice, you know, wanted to address systemic ableism, you know, and how that ableism connects to other systems of oppression. And disability justice seeks to change, you know, the normative frameworks. So, you know, we're not just composing with white men in wheelchairs. I mean, I'm stripping it down. It's more complex than that, but just to also say that, you know, there are queer folks with disabilities who want to push back against the discriminations from multiple facets, right? And then mixed ability organizing that also looks at racial, gender, class, sexuality, diversity. So that means that we're no longer in these silos, right? We're organizing together across disabilities. And in my organization at the Disabled Women's Network, we are explicitly a cross-disability feminist movement, right? So we understand that we will change systems if we come together, that we stop being in these silos. And then the last piece for disability justice is advocacy that addresses systems of oppression that, you know, are ableism, but also racism and sexism and class and homophobia. And I would add to that as well, like there's an et cetera there, you know, colonialism and capitalism and imperialism. All these things are connected. So that was just to ground us a little bit in disability rights versus disability justice. And then, all right, let's get intersectional. So we talked about the intersectionality as an intersectionality in the readings as being a component of disability justice, right? Disability justice also pushes back on capitalism as a framework, pushes back on colonialism, as I said earlier, and many other things. But intersectionality is an important piece, and it's also important to ground us in where intersectionality emerged, and it's from Black feminist scholarship and thought that also you know, grounded itself in movements of Black women before it became a term that Kimberly Crenshaw, you know, coined in 1989. So I think it's important to explicitly mention that, because often, you know, theories and a thought that comes from Black feminist scholars tend to not be as explicitly talked about, so it's important to name that. And in intersectionality, so in the image of the intersectionality framework image, there's a blue straw figure, right? That's a person at the center with green arrows sort of emerging from every different direction from the person. And each one indicates an aspect, right? Such as race, ethnicity, religion, language, heritage, history, immigration status, gender, family status, income. I mean, it says aboriginality on the image. In Canada, we would use indigeneity as a term for that. Ability, geographic location, age, sexuality, occupation, education. And these are all in one person, right? They come and they intersect to create the lived experience of this person. And so they're important to take into consideration. I'm going to pause here for a second to sort of ask, why do we think that that's important to take into consideration all of these things, especially when we think about policies that are put in place, or what else? Why do we think that that's important when we're thinking about things like policy and things like the way services are given to folks? I want to hear from y'all. And you can take the mic. I don't want to hear myself talking all the time. I'm trying to go to the chat.
Hi, Nelly. Thank you. This is Daniel. I had my hand raised. I wanted to talk a little bit, not to answer directly your question. I had a question before, which was, you know, when you were talking about these two approaches, the rights-based approach and the disability justice. For me, from my perspective, I've always kind of resisted these dichotomies because I feel that they can, you know, take different approaches and strategies from each other to support and to. So from my perspective, and I wanted to hear your opinion, what differentiates is the purpose and the principles behind it, not so much the strategies and the methodologies they use. But I wanted to hear what you think, because and it relates a lot with the question that you're asking, because if we part, so for example, if we part from a rights-based approach and we look into, you know, how people with disabilities live or experience some circumstances, and how is that different for folks who also are Black or who also are, you know, part of the LGBTQI community, or if we look into those and intersect the rights of those people, like what do you think about that? Thank you. Sorry if I wasn't very clear, but it's very confusing a little bit in my head too.
Okay, no, that's fine. Thank you for bringing that up, Danielle. I really appreciate that, and I apologize for not seeing your raised hand earlier. Yeah, the chat and doing the animation sometimes. You know, I see what you're saying about the not making it necessarily an oppositional or a this versus that, and I did term it as versus, so I can see what you're talking about. I think one way of maybe framing it is that one builds into the other, so it's not necessarily in opposition. I think that disability rights, you know, it's important as a concept in terms of understanding that everyone has rights and everyone should be, you know, able to fully enjoy their rights. I think the difference is that the disability justice framework really brings in the multiplicity that is a person, right? And when we're putting together policies, for example, we want to think about the most marginalized. And that's the idea of intersectionality, right? Is that we bring in what would folks who are most at the margins, so when we want to center the margins, you know, what would they need in order for the society to be inclusive and diverse and understanding of those needs. And that's not often how policies are made, right? It doesn't take in all these things. It tends to silo or to say, okay, we're going to talk about, for example, we're going to talk about education as a right, and not think about necessarily how education is experienced by folks who are multiply marginalized. And that's where, for example, disability justice starts to bring in all of these different things that may influence a person's experience versus the right, well, not necessarily versus, but that moves us away from very siloed ideas of what rights are. It tries to really combine all of these things, and it's hard to do. I don't know if that answers your question. I'm seeing a lot of things go in the chat, and it's a bit overwhelming. I'm that little thundercloud from earlier. How do I scroll up?
Thank you, Nelly. It did.
Okay, cool. Oh, wow. Sorry, now my mind's like, woo, there's so many things.
Nelly, there's Almas who's also got her hand raised.
Oh, okay. Thank you for mentioning that. Almas, do you want to speak?
Hi, Nelly. Can you hear me?
Yes, of course.
Okay, great. So I basically wanted to answer your question about why there is a need for intersectionality. And as a lot of people have already covered in the chat box, our lives have multiple identities, and as such, our rights and our duties and the schemes or the benefits that are available to us are also multiple. So coming from India specifically, where caste system is an important part of our society, you can see that because of the caste system and the sort of non-availability of jobs or occupation, or being pushed to do a lot more of manual work, or being pushed to go into the mining or tanning or any other work which results in disability. So there is a clear connection between the caste and sort of disability that you have. However, the disability legislation in India, or the legislation which deals with prevention of atrocities based on castes, neither of them speaks of the other. There is no mention of caste or disability. So when it comes to such multiple identities which have a very strong correlation with the other, if the policies and any other schemes or benefits that are for the marginalized community does not take into account the intersectionality, then even the rights that are accrued to the marginalized communities are also a haphazard and piecemeal rather than a complete evaluation of their needs. So that's why I feel intersectionality is necessary.
Thank you. That's such an important analysis of why intersectionality is important, right? So thank you so much for bringing that in. I wanted to see just in the chat, if y'all would give me just one moment to catch up on the chat. Yeah, yeah, because we don't live single issue lives. Thank you for bringing in Audre Lorde. Yeah, there are different types of oppression. Mm-hmm. Right. I'm sorry if I'm sorry if I mispronounce anyone's name. Jing. The challenge is when you use your intersectional lens and you meet a legislator policymaker who makes you prioritize one issue over the other. Very, very important point. And I think that links to what Almas was saying earlier. Then you have to choose, and sometimes you're forced to exclude a specific group in the process, right? So legislators have a very specific goal in mind, and when you bring in too many complications, it's sort of like, oh, it's too much, when really it shouldn't be. Mm-hmm. Right, so the intersectional approach showcases how ableism works in a much more powerful and clear way. Mm-hmm. without intersectional understanding, disability studies in South becomes incomplete. Thank you for that, Mary Sport. I'm so sorry if I mispronounce anyone's name. Thank you for engaging in that. I'm gonna close the chat just so I can go to the next slide, which is also thinking about intersectionality. So earlier we looked at sort of the aspects or components that create a person's identity, right? How they identify in terms of race and you know, gender and sexual orientation and so on. But the intersecting layers are also systems of oppression, right? And it comes back to what we were saying earlier about disability justice, really looking at systemic issues, right? So that it's not just, the problem isn't the person, it's the system that's around the person, right? So the image that is there is sort of intersecting layers of oppression, right? And it's kind of a meme that has the words colonialism, ableism, medical industrial complex, education system complex, eugenics, capitalism, and racism, and those are all in like sort of multiple colors on a dark black background. I think I wrote blue because I looked at it differently. In any case, what other intersecting layers are maybe missing from this meme and this image? Because there's other things that can come in that are systems that we need to look at to better understand how that influences a person's lived experience. Can someone name maybe something that hasn't been directly put in as a system in those layers? Patriarchy, sexism, yeah. Thank you for those. I would also maybe, yes, thank you, love it. Well, don't love the prison industrial complex, but yes, it's definitely part of it. And when we think about how disability intersects with police violence and race, you know, we see it more prominently from what's happening in the US and in Canada. I also want to put that out there. You know, we often think that the US is kind of the place where, you know, at the intersections of race and police brutality and disability as well, that's where it happens more prominently, but it does happen in Canada, and we have cases here that are just not as widely known. Including in Tiohtià:ke in Montreal, where I'm based. I have a long list of names. Anti-Blackness and colorism, yeah. Lookism, can someone tell me more about that? Like, I'm learning now, if you don't mind. I would love to know more. Yeah, go ahead, sorry.
Can you hear me? Hello?
Yes.
Yeah.
I can hear you. Yeah.
So lookism, it was from me. So it's basically how we value people based on how they look like, and therefore, like for example, thin women are more worthy than curvy women, etc., etc. And I think that specifically when it comes to disability. So I really liked the first and the second module, saying that we actually also could challenge the perspectives of how we see the beauty.
Yeah, right. And Mia Mingus actually wrote something wonderful around the ugly, right, and embracing the ugly and what that means. We often think about, you know, beauty and ugliness as being sort of like opposite in a spectrum, but like, what does it mean to embrace the full diversity of bodies, but also of minds, of how people move about the world? So yeah, criminality and disability, absolutely. Caste system, immigration status, yeah. And I would add to that, I'm just go back to my little notes here. So I'm going to close the chat. But thank you all. Oh, someone raised their hand. Sorry.
Nelly, Prashant has raised his hand.
Yes. Yeah, go ahead, please.
Hello, Nelly. There was one point that I wanted to bring in. People living in rural areas in, let's say, a developing country are particularly, affected by all the issues that you have discussed so far. And what happens is, more often than not, the real financial or the legal aid, or any kind of help from civil society organizations doesn't reach them because of their location. So I think rural people, LGBT people or disabled people living in rural areas, they are particularly a threat. I think this is one point which definitely affects some people in India, disabled people, because what happened this time in Corona, during COVID, post COVID-19, during the lockdown, people lost their jobs, and all the civil societies who wanted to help, they could only reach the urban centers. So I think that's
such a good point, Prashant. Thank you for bringing that in. And yeah, location and in rural areas where services may not be as present as in urban centers. Such an important point to take into consideration, especially when we think about centering the margins. You mentioned LGBT community, folks with disabilities who may be in places where there are even less services. So how do we take into consideration what their needs are? You mentioned Corona and the lockdown. Certainly, I can share an example here of folks who were in institutions, right? So that's another thing I wanted to bring in, sort of like the institutionalization of folks with disabilities. And in the context here where I'm from, there were folks who are older and often living with disabilities who live in institutions. We call them here, it's like a, well, I'm going to say it in French, it's CHSLD, which are long-term care facilities for older people. And the rates of death from coronavirus were astronomically high in those places because there was cuts in funding to the long-term care facilities, right? And so the care that older folks were having in these institutions was already direly lacking before coronavirus. And then coronavirus hits, and that just exacerbates the problem of how we didn't care for our elders, right? And I mean, it's complex also in the sense that what do we mean when we put people in institutions, right? What does that mean about community, about care, how we care for each other? And it's very different depending on where you are located in the world. And also, I just think about my own context, in my familial context. Leaving a person who is older alone is just not something that we do. So, like it also talks about the individuality of we placing somebody in long-term care versus having community, and what does it mean to build community and care around folks who need that care. And we're all going to need that care, I believe it's Mia Mingus who talked about the disability as being something that we're all gonna experience at some point or another. And so we really need to think about care in a more complex way. Thank you so much, everyone, for engaging in that conversation. I'm going to move through the slides just because I'm a bit worried about time. So, and we have an exercise. So I'm not going to go through too deeply on the 10 principles of disability justice. I posted that in the chat of the the course. I invite you to look at it, print it, put it up somewhere, just to give you more of a sense of what really anchors disability justice, right? I'm going to move through that one quickly. All right, let's get to activities. Cool. Let's see here. All right, so the first activity is we often talk about systems of oppression and how they intersect and how there's barriers and limitations. But what if we thought about a world where folks with disabilities are free to be, and where access actually is universal and happening? So I want us to think about maybe situations where we're thinking about systemic access instead of systemic ableism or systemic discrimination against people with disabilities. And an example of interpersonal inclusion. We often talk about interpersonal ableism as being, and interpersonal ableism being the way that folks interact with each other that's ableist. So an example of that would be the language that we use, you're crazy. That's an ableist term, right? So the interpersonal, what would it look like to have systemic access? So at a more, institutional systemic level, what does access, real true access look like, and inclusion? So I was gonna do this as part of groups, but I think for the sake of time, we can maybe talk about different examples of that in the chat. How does that sound to folks? Oh, wow, the chat. Oh no, okay, I'm seeing that. I'm seeing there's I want to pause here because I see that folks are having a hard time with the PowerPoint. Sushma, is there something that we can do to make it clearer, or
I think
just
the PowerPoint seems clear. I think Nurzada is having a problem, but I think, is it clear for everyone else? I think you could continue, Nelly.
All right. So I'm seeing from Agnes to clarify the question. Absolutely. So I was saying that we often talk about discrimination or barriers, and we often talk about ableism as being, yeah, the barrier. But what if we thought about a world where there isn't ableism, right? We're thinking about this utopic world, and if we can chat about, what would systemic inclusion look like? What would interpersonal, interpersonal inclusion also look like? Does that clarify? Folks want to give. Thank you, Lisa, for that, for putting it in the chat. Yeah. I'm just looking for maybe a few examples that we can talk about in the chat. It's hard to think about because we don't live in a world where everything is great. Thank you, Lisa, for that. Yeah. Okay. Okay, so I'm seeing educational environment without segregation. Yeah. Where diversity and inclusiveness are not even discussed. Each and every student have equal access. Yeah, at the same pace. Totally. Yes, prison abolishment. Absolutely. We talked about the prison industrial complex earlier, how we put people in cages, and we shouldn't be doing that. Education for everyone that's useful and valuable for all of our lives. Yeah, thank you. No stigma. 1000%. All right. Signing service providers at government offices. Yeah, totally. Access to services like health will be available to all. Totally, yeah. Integrating the needs of persons with disabilities at workplace, yeah, and projects and programs. No othering of sexual orientations. Yeah, totally, absolutely. Working closely with disability organizations. Yeah. Community health available to all. That includes mental health. Yes. Free childcare. Totally. It would require complete revamping of our world where ever marginalized, oppressed groups would have to a say in the redesign. Oh, okay, it went up. Okay, I won't read them all, but I'm seeing lovely, lovely examples in here. Representation and visibility in books and in pictures. Yes. Okay, we're going to address that in the next slide. No more special education classes where kids with special needs are segregated. Yeah. Yeah. Need-based approach in the workplace. The organization which works for disabilities must understand the diversity and intersectionality of disabilities. Yes. Services that are inclusive. Yeah, consider diversities, free from discrimination, respect. People with psychosocial disabilities being able to live in the communities of their choice on an equal basis with others. Yes. Yeah. Coming back to not institutionalizing folks. Great. This is, I'm mindful of time. So these are all wonderful, wonderful examples. Universal design, society where everyone will feel safe, valued, respected as community members. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much for these. Okay, because I'm mindful of time, I'm going to move on to the next slide. And this one sort of, don't know if we'll have time to do this one, but I wanted us to imagine a just world in linking it to what someone mentioned in the chat. I'm going to just remove it because it's distracting me, around representation. So what I have on the slide is an image that was created for the Girls Without Barriers research report that my organization created and published this year, where we looked at, you know, from an intersectional feminist lens, what are the gaps in terms of how we talk about those with disabilities and young women with disabilities. And one of the gaps that we realized in putting together the report is representation in media. And so I put an image description for all of the characters. I'm just going to show, I'm going to flip over here to, so each character we put an image description for, and I've added that to the presentation folder, I believe, in the, in the course. So it really gives a description, and we worked with an artist to represent folks who are at the intersections, right? So I'm going to give an example of one of the images and the way we've described it, right? So an autistic two-spirit Indigenous teenager playing with a stim bracelet. They are fat. Their top is striped with colors of the non-binary flag and features the symbols of Indigenous nations. Their hair is braided to one side, and they are wearing jeans with small holes and flat shoes. So the artist that we work with is themselves a non-binary, Black, disabled, queer person, and they did a really fantastic job of putting in details about what it means to represent the multiplicity that is a person that may live with a disability, that is, you know, has different shapes, body, size, identities in terms of their background, and so on. So I kind of wanted us to imagine looking at this image, like just kind of what you see in it, but also how it would inform how the way that we could collaboratively create new worlds if we held and recognized folks with disabilities as whole, complex, abundant beings. But I'm realizing we don't have enough time for that. And I do want to leave some time for questions. So maybe that's something we could carry forward in on the platform. I will post something online on the platform so we can have that discussion, if that's okay with folks, just because it also will give time for folks to read the image descriptions and have a better sense of all the wonderful characters that are on this image, yeah? I hope that's okay. I was gonna have us shout out what people recognize in this image and around representation and what it means, but let's skip that for now because I'm really mindful of time and there's not a lot of time left. So I'm gonna actually skip a few slides where we were going to talk about sexuality, disability, and ableds are weird. I'm going to skip over to ableds are weird. I had a few slides around eugenics, but these come from the slides that you already have in your PowerPoint presentation for week 2. So I'm going to skip over those. And I'm going to take us down to ableds are weird. So I just wanted to have just a moment to talk about that. So Imani Barbarin, who is a wonderful, wonderful disability justice advocate, also known by her blog alias Crutches and Spice. So she's a Black disabled woman activist writer who started a hashtag conversation online that I particularly love called ableds are weird, so hashtag ableds are weird, which encourage people with disabilities to share on Twitter the ways in which non-disabled people treated them and made them uncomfortable and just generally say the most ridiculous things to them. And in these sort of strange encounters, people recount under that hashtag, ridiculous things that were said to them, but in the same breath calling them inspiring or seeing them as like sources of motivation, so like this kind of like idea of inspiration porn. Inspiration porn. And so I wanted to just put a few examples of tweets that were shared under the hashtag that demonstrate really how ableism affects people's perspectives on disabled people's sexuality. And I'm gonna talk about these 2, and there are more in the PowerPoint presentation. I think there's 2 more. So I just wanted to read those out because I feel that those particularly talk about how at the intersections of sexuality and disability, people have really ableist ideas of what folks with disabilities can or cannot do. So the first one says, it's a screenshot that says, at a grocery store, a woman made a beeline for me and with no introduction asked, "Can you have sex?" It was the first time I've been asked this. So I said flirtatiously, "Why are you offering?" And she literally jumped back in disgust and told me I was gross. Ableds are weird. And then the second one is my ableds are weird moment. So this is another tweet, and the person says, I was in a wheelchair at an airport with my then baby at TSA, getting a pat. Stunned that I had a husband, had a baby, and proceeded to express surprise I could have sex and asked if I got wet down there. True story, hashtag true story. So I just wanted us to sort of wrap our minds around how ableism really affects people in various ways, especially when it talks about the preconceived notions and ideas we have about the sexuality and the desirability of folks with disabilities, right? really, really mindful of time. There's like about 5 minutes left, I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yes, Nelly, 5 minutes, yes.
Yeah, okay, so I'm sorry, I fast forwarded through that. Yeah, Eunice, I heard of one taxi driver commenting on the rape of a girl, right, with intellectual disability, and he said, at least someone is paying attention to her. Gosh, that's just, yeah, that's awful. And content warning, I'm so sorry. Yeah, I, as someone who is a survivor myself, this is disgusting. This is a reality of a friend of mine who's deaf, was asked by a nurse if she had had sex, right, yet she was heavily pregnant. Oof. Yeah, thank you for sharing those, but this is just to kind of get us thinking, you know, and Lisa was saying, I have heard the same thing said by police when sexual violence was reported. Yeah. So thank you for sharing those. Okay, so thanks. Also, I'm seeing that we'll go back to eugenics in week 5. Okay, and inspiration porn, cool. So with that said, I want to leave the last 5 minutes for questions, for comments, and also I put ways for you to get in touch if you need to get in touch. But yeah, I want to leave that open to all of you. What do I mean by normative frameworks? Okay, no, that's a great question. So just to explain, so normative, what we can think of normative is, and again, I'm going to bring this to sort of what we discussed in week 1 and week 2, but often, you know, what is the norm? You know, we talked about what's normal and what's considered abnormal. So the norm is usually based on like white, male, able-bodied, straight folks, right? So bringing this from that perspective, that is what's often a normative framework. So things are created for that norm. And outside of that, we can think about like all the multitudes that we are that are outside of that framework, you know. So thinking about queer, disabled, you know, folks that are outside of that framework and that push the boundaries. Does that clarify a little bit, Naomi? Can you share an experience where you use disability rights, disability justice in your work simultaneously? Oh, that's such a good question. In 3 minutes. So yeah, I mean, in terms of disability rights, I mean, we are a disability rights organization. I think we're moving more and more in our understanding that disability justice is where the future is at. But at the root and at its base, you know, our organization was founded by women who did not see themselves represented in the larger disability rights movement because it was very sort of overtaken by men, and so created an organization. But more and more as we evolve, we know that the intersectionality of the multiplicity of who we are and moves us towards disability justice. So we're not denying our roots, but we're moving towards something that's more inclusive. So I think that's how we kind of use it simultaneously. Thank you, everyone.